Folks, we'll get started in just a second as the room continues to fill. I see the counter continue to click up, so we'll give things another 15 to 30 seconds and we will get the program started. Yeah. Okay, coffee in hand. Welcome, everybody. Welcome and good afternoon. My name is Danny Schultz, and before I introduce this event, I do want to welcome my mom, Hadassah Schultz, who is on today with all of you. She should be hopefully hearing me right now if I controlled her computer remotely appropriately. So hi, Mom. And on behalf of Westchester Jewish Council, I'm honored to be introducing today's event, part of our WJC's successful, very successful monthly Israel Connection series. For those of you who don't know, the WJC is an umbrella organization representing 135, I think we're above 135 Jewish organizations, schools, and synagogues in Westchester and the greater New York area, the 8th largest Jewish community in the United States, totaling over 150,000 citizens. I'm very proud to be a board member of WJC and also the chair of our Israel Affairs Committee, so I'm delighted to be hosting our discussion today. Today's topic: what else? The Israeli election, take 4. Our expert today is Shachar Azani. Welcome, Shachar. For those of you who don't know Shachar Azani is the founder and principal at Fourth Dimension Strategies, a political and media consulting and strategy firm. And he is currently the senior vice president at JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Services, whose aim is producing media and content offerings to develop and share a deeper understanding of Jewish life and the state of Israel. Shachar was formerly an executive director for Stand With Us, an organization, as you all know, dedicated to Israel education and the fight against BDS and anti-Semitism. He's also served for over 15 years at Israel's foreign ministry and was the consul for media affairs at the Consulate General of Israel in New York, where he was responsible for maintaining direct contact with the US media on all political, social, and business issues affecting Israel. Shachar also served as media officer at the Embassy of Israel in London, as deputy spokesperson at Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Jerusalem, Israel's consul for culture, media, and public affairs in Los Angeles, and deputy ambassador at the Embassy of Israel in Nairobi, Kenya. He holds a law degree as well as an MBA, and prior to working for the Israeli government, Mr. Azani practiced litigation law at the firm of Chaim Tzadok in Tel Aviv. Most importantly, he is married to Eleanor, and they have 3 wonderful children together, Daniela, Yacheli, and Itai. Shachar, toda rabah. Thank you for being with us. And I am going to kick things off. I'm going to remind everybody that for question purposes, use your chat window. I'm going to do my very best to get everybody's questions floated and out there. We have a lot to cover. It's 12:05. Let me get things going and ask with a very seasonally appropriate question. Tell us, how does this election differ from all others in Israel over the years?
Well, such a pleasure to be with you, Danny, and with everyone here at the council, literally my family of many years. And Hadassah, how are you? It's a pleasure to speak to your son. I'd like to, first of all, again, thank you for the beautiful introduction. It's always good to just dive into the Israeli political quagmire, and what's better than over lunch while our minds are still working. So just before I jump into it, I want to give quick insights and overview, and then we can jump for some Q&A. So when we talk about the results, where do we stand now? And what I'm going to give you now is true to about 21 minutes ago. Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party emerged with 30 seats in the Knesset. Yair Lapid's Yesh Atid, the major opposition party, with 17. Look at the gap there. Ultra-Orthodox Sephardic party, Shas, headed by Aryeh Deri, with 9 seats, increase in power. Blue and white, Benny Gantz, 8 seats, the surprise of the election. United Torah Judaism with 7 seats. Naftali Bennett's Yamina, which was expected to be the kingmaker and may still be, with 7 seats only. Labour Party, which was eulogized only 3 months ago, is emerging with 7 seats. Avigdor Lieberman's Israel Beitenu emerges with 7 seats. The joint Arab list came down from 15 seats in the outgoing Knesset to 6 only. The religious Zionists, a new party, is emerging with 6 seats and more, which I'll elaborate in a minute. New Hope, headed by Gideon Sa'ar, which initially came out with 18 to 22 seats in potential polls, emerged with only 6 seats, the disappointment of the elections. Number 11, by the way, on that list was former Consul General in New York, Danny Dayan, who's unfortunately not going to be a Knesset member. Meretz, the progressive left party, emerged with 5 seats, and United Arab List by Mansour Abbas, 5 seats. Now, let's dive into what we're seeing here. First of all, another political stalemate, not dissimilar from what we've seen in the past. However, what is different, like you said, Danny, about this election? First and foremost, I want to point the finger at what to me is a strategic earthquake, which is the Arab-Israeli sector. I want you to remember this, not just when it comes to this election specifically, but for future to come. What has happened in the 4th round of the election was an unbelievable earthquake in the Arab-Israeli sector when the joint Arab list parted ways between them and Mansour Abbas, the United Arab List. Mansour Abbas has been signaling partnership with Netanyahu on some political issues in the course of the last Knesset, it's just Knesset, when the Prime Minister attended a Knesset committee meeting headed by Abbas dealing with crime within the Arab-Israeli sector, showing his respect and importance in his eyes of the issue and of Abbas. Abbas himself partnered with Netanyahu on other political issues when it comes to taking down some decisions made in the Knesset or working around some political obstacles. And what Mansour Abbas said that made him part ways from the joint Arab list, the joint Arab list insisted on saying no to Netanyahu whatever happens. And Abbas says, I'm a political operator. I want to take care of my people. As far as I'm concerned, I don't mind who is going to be the prime minister of the Zionist government or the Zionist state. All I want is to be able to manifest my power in the public and be able to provide my public with the kind of budgets and solutions that they need in time of great increase in violence and crime in the Arab-Israeli sector. A couple of weeks ago, a 15-year-old teenager is shot dead. Other people are killed, car bombs and other instances of great violence. And he says it's time for us Arab Israelis to take part in the greater political game, not entirely dissimilar than the one played by the other sectorial parties like the ultra-Orthodox and others. And it's important to remember that what happened as a result was that not only did he pass with these 5 seats that could change, we'll talk about that later, but 6 with the joint Arab list, in an unbelievable diminishing of their power because they already include 3 different Arab parties. So we have seen a trend here that also showed itself not only through Mansour Abbas, but also through campaigning. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu campaigned heavily within Arab villages and municipalities. You could see Arab language videos for the Likud party. You could see Likud billboards in Arabic in those places. And even though it's not clear yet how it manifested itself in the actual voting, it's already seen that he received close to 1 seat. Almost 1 seat that's coming from the Arab sector, seats that did not go to the joint Arab list. Now, on the principal level, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, by doing what he did in this election and by partnering with Mansour Abbas, opened the door, signal to everybody else in the political game that the Arabs are part of the political game. Now, if you remember what happened at the end of this last Knesset that just dispersed, there was an attempt to establish a coalition, an alternative government instead of that of Netanyahu with Yair Lapid, supported by the joint Arab list. And there were members of Knesset from the right and center right who resisted it, and therefore led to a situation where blue and white Benny Gantz parted ways, and we had a different situation. And it was Netanyahu himself who opened the door to that participation. I believe that this did not only create a mini revolution in this election, but also in the times to come. Now, when you look in the current blocks as a result of the election, the way they look is the bloc that supports Benjamin Netanyahu has around 52 seats. The bloc that opposes Netanyahu has around 56 seats, including the joint Arab list. In between, you have two parties. One is Naftali Bennett's Yamina that refused to say whether they're going to go with or without, even though the assumption is they're going to go with the prime minister, and Mansour Abbas, who is now being heavily courted both by the anti-Netanyahu and by the pro-Netanyahu bloc. That is the most unbelievable change that has happened in Israeli politics in many, many years. Now, when we talk about fractures and splits, we've seen others as well. Within the religious Zionist sector, within the right wing, instead of having Naftali Bennett and Bezalel Smotrich, who used to be together, now they ran separately. Together, they garnered about 7-8 seats. Separately, Bezalel Smotrich brought 6 and Naftali Bennett 7, together 13. Through that split, they were able to increase the power of the representation of the Republic. That is also an incredible change, because what does it pertain for the future of Israeli coalitions? In addition, even within the right wing, you have Gideon Sa'ar, who has 5, 6, maybe 7 seats, who is very much to the right, and you have the Likud party, who is very much to the right, and within the right wing, you still have the existence of two different entities. I want to mention something about Smotrich. His religious Zionist party was also able to take votes away, and get this, from the ultra-Orthodox party, United Torah Judaism. There were Haredis, ultra-Orthodox, who voted for Bezalel Smotrich because they felt that the ultra-Orthodox parties did not fight for them properly in the course of the last year and during the COVID crisis. So we're talking about an election that has a lot of different mini earthquakes, with one major earthquake being the participation politically of Arab Israelis. I watched an interview in the course of election day, and there was an 8-year-old Arab Israeli child who was interviewed, an 8-year-old, and he was asked by the reporter, so do you have a message for the Arab Israeli public? And this 8-year-old says, it's important that we go out and vote because we need 5 more hospitals in Arab villages across the country. Think about what that means when it comes from the mouth of an 8-year-old, not to mention other adults. A few more observations before we jump into the questions. COVID. What was the effect of COVID in the elections? If you look at the results of election in the course of the last 2 years, 1, 2, 3, and 4, they're quite similar. So there wasn't a significant change. People did not vote Netanyahu out as a result because of the way the government handled the crisis, nor did people overwhelmingly supported him as a result of the success, and it was a success of the vaccination campaign. So that's very interesting to see. In addition, the United Torah Judaism, I have to say, was very much upset with Netanyahu because in the course of the election, he actually allowed to funnel votes from them into Bezalel Smotrich religious Zionist party, and that cost them a mandate or two. One more change that was significant, and especially significant for me, was to see Benny Gantz, blue and white, who was expected to not even pass the electoral threshold, not only emerge, but come out with 8 seats in the Knesset. Now, it's an unbelievable moment because there was no expectation in the political system or within the pollster that Benny Gantz would be able to survive what happened to him in the course of the last year. He parted ways, just to remind everyone, from the anti-Netanyahu bloc under the banner of fighting COVID, and helped him establish a government, a rotation government, coalition government, in which the Prime Minister Netanyahu was supposed to take the first year, and then Benny Gantz was supposed to assume position in November of 2021. Netanyahu famously promised on March 21st last year on a TV interview to the major news channel, Channel 12, on Saturday night, no tricks, no shticks. If you come with me, Benny, everything will be fine. And Benny jumped aboard and said it's important to support Israel in such a time. And lo and behold, when the time came, Netanyahu refused to pass a budget for Israel, thus allowing him a way out of this coalition agreement, which eventually led to the disbursement of the Knesset and the 4th round of elections. So I am absolutely positive that if Netanyahu had the option to go back in time and maybe maintain that kind of government with blue and white, a very obedient partner, a very innocent, less politically savvy partner, but very good-willed when it comes to Israel and Israeli interests and politics, he would have maintained that rather than facing such a situation the way he does now, where he does not have a coalition government. Now, going back to the blocks for a minute, I want to mention that Mansour Abbas himself has the power. What are the options we're facing now? Mansour Abbas has the option to give Netanyahu a government if he joins Netanyahu. But who is in Netanyahu's bloc? It's the ultra-Orthodox and the ultra-right wing. Can they survive with somebody like Mansour Abbas, who is part of the Islamic movement, who is famously anti-LGBTQ, who is very much religiously conservative? So Israeli politics may encounter a variety of obstacles when it comes to be. Last comment before we jump into the question is, where are the issues? What were the issues of the elections? Was it the Israeli-Palestinian peace process? Was it the future of Israel's relations with the American administration? Was it Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah? Everything kind of vanished and everything focused on Benjamin Netanyahu, yes or no? Now, when you think about that for a minute, you also understand that the majority of the Israeli public, a big chunk in the center, around 70%, really stand at the same place when it comes to Israel's policies, when it comes to religious pluralism, when it comes to Palestinians, when it comes to Iran, terror, what Israel should do on the international stage, the ICC, The Hague. They're all together, but they're unable to join hands because of one person, because Netanyahu is the head of this bloc. And if there was somebody else leading Likud, there is no doubt in my mind that there would be a coalition government that's easily established, that's going to be able to represent 80 members of Knesset, an unbelievable majority that cannot be extorted neither by the ultra-Orthodox, nor by the Arabs or any other sectorial party, that they will be able to implement much needed reforms on a variety of fields that the state of Israel and that the Israeli public needs. At the same time, it's just as right to say that over 1 million Israelis cast their vote not just for Likud, but Likud headed by Benjamin Netanyahu, in a desire to have him as the Israeli prime minister. So this is the kind of stalemate that we're facing right now in the political sphere. Last comment is how many votes had been counted. So far, around 90% of the votes had been counted, but with the ability to make a difference of one seat going from this block to the other, we have 10% more to count. And this 10% is what we call the double envelopes, those who voted outside of their regular housing, the soldiers in the IDF, police officers, prisoners, diplomats in the Israeli foreign missions around the world, and COVID patients who could not vote in their regular ballot box and had to go to different places, by the way, using government-sponsored transportation and other facilities to be able to vote. Only once you count all of these will you be able to know exactly where you stand, and that is not expected before Friday at best.
Okay. My head is spinning. That was fantastic. Much appreciated. So we have a number of questions that I want to put to you, but one would be just within Likud for the moment. There was a bit of a battle about a year ago or so over Netanyahu's leadership of Likud. Where are those players? Who's waiting in the wings in Likud, and let's hit that question first, and let's try and move through some of these.
Wonderful. So yeah, it really is a bit of a headache. I couldn't disagree. The Israeli political map is definitely a subject for some expertise, but I'll tell you this. First of all, Netanyahu has done a great job in making sure no plant, shrub, or bush grow in his vicinity. So anybody who raised a head or tried to position themselves as leaders were immediately chopped. What you're seeing is a reality in which many of these Likud luminaries are now outside of Likud. Look at Gideon Sa'ar, for instance, as somebody who's definitely aspiring and was the only one who competed against Netanyahu in an open primaries and received around 27% of the votes. But this was considered to be chutzpah. How dare you rebel against the ultimate leader of Likud? At the same time, people like Benny Begin, who left Likud and moved to Gideon Sa'ar, Dan Meridor, and other Likud historic luminaries have moved in the direction of Sa'ar, whether the people who were left at Likud were, again, part and parcel of what the Likud is, but less of, the structure that Likud used to have for many years. And you're seeing, you use a good word, you said the shadows. There are many who wait in the shadows. And I have to, I'm, as an Israeli and as an eternal optimist, I'll say that the next leader of Likud and Israel in general is the one you and I do not see at the moment. Right. Is the one that's right now hidden because of that fear of what Netanyahu is. Because Netanyahu is an unbelievable politician. He understands Israeli society and public. He knows how to move the different levers in the Israeli political game. Whether you agree or disagree with him politically, it is absolutely astounding to just watch him operate that unbelievable system. Even his move with the Arabs. Think about this. Nobody in the anti-Netanyahu bloc had the courage and the political, how should I phrase it? Heroism to stand in front of the public and say, yes, I am willing to play ball with these parties. They're part of the Israeli public. There is no reason why most of them, by the way, not all of them, most of them are not going to be part of the bloc. And it takes Netanyahu, a visionary like Netanyahu, who understands that Israeli Arabs want to be part of Israeli society, need to be part of Israeli society. They have needs that are not answered by a self-imposed ban of their own political representation, not to partake in anything or any political dealings in the government. How frustrating is it that the Arab parties are able to achieve 15 seats and not be able to actually execute any of that credit? And comes Abbas and says, you know what? When I'm hosting a debate at the Knesset about crime in the Arab sector, the prime minister comes and sees me. And that's an incredible move. I have to put something in brackets here. Leaders will come. And I'm sure you'll see when Netanyahu decides to move on and become the super statesman of Israel, president of Israel, or whatever it is that's going to be, you will see other leaders emerge. But at the same time, when it comes to the Arab parties, I want to just mention within the joint Arab list, there is an extremist faction that's called Balad. That extremist faction is very much against Israel's nature as a Jewish state. It's the most extreme faction within that camp. And one specific member of Knesset tells the whole story. Her name is Heba Yazbak. She's 35 years old. She's a member of Knesset who praised Samir Kuntar, who was a Lebanese terrorist who killed in a heinous terrorist act in the 70s an Israeli child with his own weapon. She praised Dalal Mughrabi, a Palestinian female terrorist who was responsible for a bus attack on the coastal highway in Israel that killed 35 Israelis, saying that she achieved so much in her young life. She famously says she takes no part in standing in memory of a victim, of the Holocaust and in Holocaust commemoration ceremonies. And there was an attempt to disqualify her with the Supreme Court. She was disqualified in the Knesset Electoral Commission. The Israeli Supreme Court reversed the decision and allowed her to run, saying she's full within the legitimacy of legitimate confines of Israeli political discourse. And guess what? In this election, the joint Arab list won 6 seats. She's number 7. So the Israeli Arab public was the one that rejected Heba Yazbak. Even symbolically, and again, this may change when continuously the votes come in, but I don't necessarily expect the IDF to vote overwhelmingly in favor of the joint Arab list, but it remains to be seen. In any case, I hope that at least gave a direction.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, so we have a few questions here coming in. And I know we've spent a lot of time talking about the Arab list, but it goes beyond that. First of all, let's go then to the others for a moment. Is there an alternative coalition you could see coming together to that of Netanyahu plus? You mentioned that there are what I call in the N plus category, 52 seats, and the N minus category, 56 seats. So who's in the middle? Who's ascendant? And how might this play differently than a Netanyahu coalition?
This is great. It's like when we have our kids, we come to the doctor, and we have the kids play with the different cubes, and so. But I'll tell you what the difference is. The difference is that usually these games have rules. This one doesn't. And the only rule is that there is a rule maker, and that rule maker is Benjamin Netanyahu, who's always able to invent another rule that upends the game. So having said that, this is what I want to say. The first thing I want to debunk is the thought that you need 61 votes to have a government. Yes, it is preferable that you have 61 votes to have a government, but the truth is you only need, Danny, a majority. You need a majority of votes. Look at the map now, and you see already that the anti-Netanyahu bloc has a majority of votes against the pro-Netanyahu bloc. Where is the problem? The problem is what happens with those in the middle, with Mansour Abbas and with Naftali Bennett. Who do they go with? Because in principle, if they choose to be absent, I'm not talking about abstaining, I'm talking about taking a coffee break in the Knesset cafeteria, and they somehow miss that vote, you have a government. Now, indeed, that government is dependent on these votes. So if there is a vote of no confidence or something happens, you're able to get 61, let's say the pro-Netanyahu bloc plus Bennett and maybe even Mansour Abbas, and you can topple the government. But in principle, you don't need 61. Now, what's going to happen? First of all, even though the results of the elections are not good for Netanyahu. Yes, he did emerge as a clear leader, as the only leader. His bloc, by the way, is a very cohesive bloc. Likud, United Torah Judaism, Shas, and Bezalel Smotrich are very strong with him. There is a clear leader to the pro-Netanyahu camp, that's Netanyahu. Whereas and even Naftali Bennett, by the way, who hails from those neighborhoods, it's difficult to see a situation where he gives the crown to somebody else other than Netanyahu. Difficult. Now, when you think about his constituency, on the other hand, you see an unbelievable amalgam and mishmash of different elements of Israeli society. Just think about what you have in the form of Yair Lapid Yesh Atid, on the one hand, you have the Labour Party, you have Avigdor Lieberman, then you have New Hope, that's a right wing, and you have Meretz on the far left, and you have the Joint Arab List. Now, in the course of the elections, many leaders signed documents on different shows and said, I will not sit with this, and he will not sit with me, and together we will not sit with that. That's all going to evaporate, because if we are to avoid the fifth round of election, people are going to have to break their promises. Most chances at the moment, I still believe, are that Netanyahu will be able to establish a government. I mean, we still have to wait and see what results are going to come in, but he's the kind of shrewd politician who's going to be able to take Bennett and have together the 59 and pull even Mansour Abbas, whether active participation or standing on the sidelines and just abstaining by providing some budgets as a result. And in this kind of mind of thinking, you would say it's not ideal, it's far from ideal, but at the same time, he can establish a government, Danny, let it sync with everyone else, for a month, for 2 months, for 3 months, and then say, you know what? If you want to be a responsible political leader, help me. Because the current government, I'm held hostage by Mansour Abbas, by the religious Zionists, but if only you join me, Benny Gantz, if only you come with me, Yair Lapid, if only you join me, Gideon Sa'ar, come back home, we will have a stable government. So it could be a two-phase of establishing a government. At the same time, what Netanyahu did to Benny Gantz in the course of the last year, no, Danny, like seriously, what he did to Benny Gantz, he was our version of crucifying somebody on a Magen David politically. On the gates of Jerusalem, anybody coming in and out of the city could see his humiliation. He was taken down by his own camp. He was taken down by the right wing. He was described as a nothing, as a know-nothing, as a political idiot, as a buffoon. We spoke about the pity campaign. Benny Gantz came on Israeli media and said, you know what, I laid on the grenade for you. I made sure Netanyahu doesn't have dictatorship power because I came in. You owe me now for that. And you know what? The Israeli public said yes. And in that respect, Danny, I want to say something optimistic. Benny Gantz was indeed conned by Netanyahu. And when you think to yourself, what kind of conmanship you're talking about and how in your face should it be, politics includes all kinds of games, but this was done in such a blatant manner that people felt for Gantz and failed for what Israeli politics should be. And they rewarded Benny Gantz by saying that went too far and gave him 8 seats in a funny way. And ironically, Netanyahu, it's his dream that Benny Gantz will rejoin him. For one, it's difficult for me to see it happening. And a word should be said also about Labour Party. Merav Michaeli of Labour Party, who refused to join Netanyahu's government. There were 3 members of Knesset for Labor. 2 joined the government, became ministers. She refused and stayed as a member of the coalition who is in the opposition. And she went with her truth, and whether you agree with her or not, out of an 0.2% support 3 months ago, she gained 7 seats, resurrecting the corpse of the Labour Party. That's an unbelievable feat, but it's also a resonance of the principle of truth and honesty and decency, even in politics and even in Israeli politics.
Can you for a moment touch on how the background issue of Netanyahu's prosecution still plays into all this? Is there and is any of the notion of a changing of the guard if prosecution should go forward, that construct that was with Blue and White, is that still in the background as a possible fix in some way?
Well, you know what? I'm just wondering, is that a case? Is he facing a court case? Is there anything happening there, right? Nobody spoke about this in the election. It's like they exhausted all of the arguments in the last election. And then this one, you barely heard anything about this. Part of the reason is that it exhausted itself in the Israeli public opinion. Netanyahu famously and arrogantly said on media interviews when he was asked about the matter, he said, listen, in a few days, by the way, April 5th, as of April 5th, it comes the stage in court where you start hearing witnesses, and it's gonna the court sessions will take place 3 times a week, Danny, 3 times a week, and these testimonies are going to come out and they're going to play in the media. And the prime minister was asked, he said, "What are you going to do? How are you going to be able to manage a country, and a country as volatile as Israel with so many different arenas, while conducting your court cases, 3 days a week?" And he said, what I can do in 10 minutes, my rivals can't do in a week. So don't worry about the time. We're good with that. And you know what? The Israeli public believes it. When Albert Bourla, the Pfizer CEO, comes on Channel 12 News and says, I will give the vaccines to anyone. And of course, many world leaders called me, but your prime minister was obsessive. He called me at 3 a.m. He didn't give me a moment's rest, and the Israeli public buys it. So the prosecution plays a part. Now, how is it going to play a part now, you ask? Here it is. Right now, the Israeli Supreme Court, if you remember last election, said that a member of Knesset who has indictments, not just on the way, but even conducted in court against them, there is no limitation, according to Israeli law, for them to be a prime minister and to continue holding their position. That's what the Supreme Court said in a huge majority, that the prime minister is able to continue being prime minister. However, what happens if that law changes? What happens if in the next few days, the volatile majority that may not be enough to establish a government will be enough to vote an amendment to the law that says that anybody has a standing indictment against them cannot be a prime minister? By the way, you can't be a minister, but the prime minister you can be. So what happens if they change that law? And they change that law with the either avoidance or support of the Joint Arab List. And the law is changed, and suddenly nothing happens as far as coalition. The only thing that changes is that Netanyahu can't be the one to establish it. Now Likud has to sort the cards again and maybe choose somebody else to lead them in the negotiations. That is one possible scenario that may transpire, because in this kind of political quagmire, there is very little desire by Israeli politicians to go to another round of elections. I mean, most of them, because Benny Gantz's achievement is unique. Labour Party's resurrection is unique. Bezalel Smotrich and the religious rights achievement is unique. By the way, they have one member of Knesset that's included within the Likud list. So Likud actually has 29 and the religious right has 7. Is there going to be another solution? And in this regard, I'll mention Gideon Sa'ar. Gideon Sa'ar, even though he failed miserably at the polls, he is an experienced political operator, kind of like the brain of the machinery that composes coalitions, that includes him and another member of Knesset Likud, Zev Elkin, and they're both now on the opposite side of Netanyahu. They know how Netanyahu works, and they know how to build coalitions. Are they going to concoct a magic potion that's going to prevent the fifth round of election and bring about a change in the Israeli political map? Don't rule it out.
Okay, I can't keep up with you. Okay, so let's dive into another aspect here for a second. And for those of you who have posted some questions, I promise I will raise them and get to them. But on another tack here, you know, with so many inspirational leaders in the Israeli high-tech scene, where are they in politics? Naftali Bennett had a very successful startup and sold that and entered politics. Erel Margalit of JVP was in Knesset and left. Izhar Shai of Canaan Partners, who I know is, I believe, now in Knesset. And then, of course, there's Nir Barkat, one of the early investors in Checkpoint and founder of BRM, that was the mayor of Jerusalem for many years up until 2018. Who else is there? Where are they? And are there other segments of society where that skill set and that inspirational leadership are going to come forth?
Well, first of all, Barkat, very popular politician in Israel. And you mentioned Naftali Bennett. I think he also, not just a historic exit, he also had one like a couple of months ago, I think, with MyHeritage. So, and it came to the news and he said, well, you know, I need, you know, for my campaign, that's why I'm in public service. But I'll tell you this, there are two layers to this. One, the general one. The general one is look at the pendulum of the Israeli engine. Let's call it the Israeli engine. Up to the mid-80s there, you saw the government as a major engine of growth for Israel and the Israeli state. And as of the mid-80s until now and beyond, you see the private sector emerging as a leader, like the names you just mentioned, Danny, all stellars and leaders in their fields, inspirational people who've been able to have real life achievements in what they do. And then you look at Israeli politics and you ask yourself, where are they? Where are they? Why can't we have more of these? Well, first of all, so many of them do not want to get into Israeli politics because it's such a harsh business to be in. It's very ferocious and cruel. You need to have as thick a skin as 10 elephants and beyond. When you look into the kind of hellfire that is rained on political leaders, including, by the way, Netanyahu, on so many different arenas. And I don't want to touch on the legal issues, but some of them do include question marks. I mean, the way the prosecution handled itself. I mean, you have to be honest in addressing those issues. It's not a clear-cut case where he's guilty of everything. This is touching the thin line between what politicians do with media, how should politicians behave with gifts that are given by friends. It's not a clear-cut answer. And there are those who claim that Netanyahu is being targeted, and you're asking to, you know, check it now only with him, whereas you gave a pass to so many others. There is a problem there, but the truth is that the fact that he's able to survive this in such a manner is remarkable. So you can't blame them for understanding that Israeli politics, unfortunately, is not a meritocracy. And when you go in, and when they're in their field, they're able to achieve, get results, by the way, amazing results for Israel, without all of the added stress that Israeli politics brings in. However, it is depressing because you want to be able to have the kind of politics where you have those leaders, where you have the incentive for the young Izhar Shai and the young Erel Margalit and the young people who look at politics to say, I want to serve the Israeli public. I want to be part of those leaders. Why did I join the foreign ministry when I did? Because I wanted to showcase the face of Israel to American Jewish communities and to communities around the world, because it's important to be part of that equation. But at the same time, things have to change. And you saw the vote, the very encouraging vote to people like Merav Michaeli and Benny Gantz, which I view as a symbol, because if you look at Benny Gantz, he is exactly the kind of politician you'd want. He comes with, you know, good intentions. He wants to do the right thing. He's learning it the hard way because he went through a tough time with Netanyahu. But the fact is that he got 8 seats in the Knesset. It's an unbelievable revolution. So I think we have to hopefully post-Netanyahu era, because Netanyahu is a scary political figure for anyone, including for his own contenders. You know, when you look at the Likud, nobody dares to raise a voice against him because he is so powerful. He can quash you politically in a heartbeat. He can maneuver the different strains of, you know, directions of Israeli politics in different ways that, I mean, look at what he has done to Bennett. Bennett started with this campaign with 14, 18 potential seats. He ended up with barely 7, and all as a result of Netanyahu's targeted attack. So I think Israeli politics will have to be judged during the Netanyahu era and post-Netanyahu era.
How does, if at all, election finance and party finance come into play here? You know, I would think people who are disaffected or afraid of either Netanyahu or other parties that they have been a part of, as is tried and true in all countries, you hive off, you set a new, you set up a new party, but everything relies on being able to fund your effort. Just for our audience, frankly, for myself, I've never focused on it. How does that work in Israel, and then overall, that takes us into a question that I had, and that Shoshana Betterman is also asking, which is, talk for a moment maybe about the structure of the Israeli election system. So finance is part of it, but are there aspects that have come under question or scrutiny that maybe could alleviate some of this? Obviously, the ones who benefit from whatever those vestiges are don't want to give them up, but that's the question.
So first of all, when you talk about finance, that also relates to Benny Gantz, because the way the Israeli system works is the government provides finance for running in the election. That is to say, if you want to run in the elections and you win a certain number of seats, you get what's called a finance unit that's dependent on your size. Now, a finance unit can range between 1 million to a couple of million shekels, double by the time of seats you got in the Knesset, and that's your financing for the campaign, which you can use to, if you ran for the first time, you can use to pay the debt that you accrued in the course of trying to change the political map. Or if you're Benny Gantz, for instance, and you're finishing a term with 17 seats in the Knesset, you get around 20 million shekels to run. So you have all of that money to spend, and at the end you get 8. But still, you came into the election with 20 times the financing unit. So when it comes to election finance, there is a desire by the state to prevent foreign interventions and to be able to support that kind of running using government funding to allow for that how shall I say, plurality of different parties and different positions at the same time, and that pertains to the system in general. We're talking about the Israeli system as such, where you don't vote for a certain person, you vote for a party. And it's not by region, it goes in general, wherever you are. This is the vote you cast. It's a national election, and that's how you end up with the different parties. And by the way, some of these ballot boxes, like Netanyahu ballots, read headed by Benjamin Netanyahu. Others just read Yesh Atid, just without any mentioning of prime ministerial candidacy. So it's very interesting the way you look at this. At the same time, here is a point. We tried direct election. We tried electing a prime minister directly back in the 90s. It didn't work. It allowed for the election of a prime minister whose party, because if I feel like I can vote for Netanyahu and choose whichever other party I can, I'm going to vote for Netanyahu and then give my vote to Shas, the ultra-Orthodox party, or give it to Naftali Bennett because I want him. But then what happens? You have a prime minister whose party has about 2 seats. So you can't really, or 4 at the minimum, you can't do anything with it. So the system was changed again. But here is the big issue. The big issue touches at the core of Israeli society. We are a multitude of tribes. Israel's constitution, does it exist? Does Israel have a constitution? Can we come together around a set of principles? Yeah, maybe the Declaration of Independence? No. Israel doesn't have a constitution. The only way it has what's called a compromise constitution, what's called a basic law. And the basic law is supposed to manifest those, principles that should bring us together. But even those basic laws come under attack from different factions. I'll tell you a story. Because when you think, again, just touching on the point of Haredis and secular and traditionals and Arabs and Jews and Mizrahi and Ashkenazi and left and right and economic left and economic right and political left and political right. So in the course of those basic laws came into being during the Rabin government. The Rabin government, and think about that for a minute, had as a leading coalition Labor and Meretz, together, by the way, 55, 56 seats. Today, Labor and Meretz are about 10, and that's also a miracle. And the Haredis, there was the proposal to have the basic law of freedom of occupation, or basic law, human rights and dignity. And the Haredi said, you know, we're afraid of this basic law because if we enact it, we're afraid the court is going to use it against us, because when we want to do Shabbat or prohibit the sale of pork, or so they conditioned their support on that issue, that it doesn't touch the status quo. And so it was written in the annals of the Knesset. But then it goes to the Supreme Court, because of course the law is enacted and an issue comes up, and the Supreme Court is faced with this question of what do we do? How do we interpret the law? Because the legislators said not to do A, B, and C. And what does the court say, Danny? The court says, once a law is born, it has a life of its own. And now we are free to interpret it as we will. And the result is the bloc of the ultra-Orthodox and to some degree religious Zionists will say, I'm not enacting anything like this anymore because I can't control it once I give it to the court. So what do? Now we have to change the court. It's not fair that we only have 9 chief justices. We should have more, and we should have a representative court where the justices are elected by the Knesset. So there is a need for a great reform, but it's a reflection of societal structure and fracture that is in existence and that needs to be dealt with in a very profound way. This cannot be just plastered with a band-aid of this reform or another, because it's always going to surface up.
Yeah, fascinating. So, you know, what is your prognosis then for political discourse or society discourse and dialogue in Israel going forward? And are there models elsewhere to learn from, to incorporate into the political system? But the first is more of a sociological question. The latter part is really about elections and modeling government.
I'll tell you, again, the eternal optimist, right, Danny? I can never see an obstacle. There is always a challenge and a solution. I think Netanyahu is a unique creation. I think he's a gifted politician and leader who is unparalleled in the Israeli scheme of things. You can't see anyone, and justifiably so, who can really outshine Netanyahu in his abilities, both externally and internally. He's really a shrewd politician. But Netanyahu represents both the problem and the solution, because like I said before, if you remove the person Netanyahu, because of what he has done, because supposedly the indictments, because supposedly the extremism, and I'm saying supposedly because he's the one who opened the door to Mansour Abbas, he signed peace agreements, all of these givens suddenly is not a given, but I'm just saying. So when you remove him from the equation, you see a huge part of the Israeli public. And when you look at the parties, you really understand that Likud can partner with Yesh Atid, that is a center party, that can partner with the ultra-Orthodox, that can go with blue and white, that can be a part with Bennett, that can go even with Labor and with Avigdor Lieberman, a New Hope. So you have a big chunk, even without going to the extremes of, you know, Meretz or Mansour Abbas or the Joint Arab List. You can still have a government that represents the majority of the Israeli public. And you can have a government with the ultra-Orthodox, and you can have a government with the Arabs, but a government that is not dependent on, that is not, that whose existence doesn't depend on them. So if they want to be part of the government and play a role, wonderful. And if they don't, the government is not going to be toppled as a result. And once that happens, Danny, Israel will finally be able to address those important issues that you mentioned, because we are a very unique country, even compared to others around the world, with the kind of problems we face, the kind of population we have, the kind of issues we need to contend with. So only such a government that's going to, coalition government, that's going to win the support of 80+ members of Knesset, will be able to tackle issues of freedom of religion, constitution, electoral system, finance, all of those issues that the drafting the ultra-Orthodox or participation in the army. What should be the level of participation of Arab Israelis, for instance? There are many questions in the Israeli quarters. They say, okay, we want the ultra-Orthodox to partake in the societal obligations, but what about the Arabs? They need to do the same. So we need to find solutions. And all of this is coming to be. I want to mention that in the course of the last year or so, you've also seen movements within Arab Israeli society of voices that call for further integration. And that's amazing to see. So I have a great whiff of optimism and a great wind of change that's coming our way, even if what we see at the moment is just an incredible brick wall that is impassable, because the spirit of Israel has always shown that we can do better.
Well, that's a very positive and optimistic note, and we've still got some time here. So let me ask you what I like to ask in all of our Israel Connection series, and take it in any direction you like. But what are your most memorable, uplifting, or frankly even challenging experiences or interactions in your various roles when dealing with the media over the past number of years? So a little bit off the election topic for the moment, but let's hear a little bit about what you've experienced. And we know how Israel is in the press. Even the most critical of us and the most supportive of us, I would imagine, agree that there's not a sort of a clear treatment of Israel relative to other countries, certainly in the UN and elsewhere. But what is your most uplifting and optimistic, and maybe one of the most challenging and disappointing things you've experienced in your many years? You're quite an expert.
I'll take this to our field here, the public, rather than just media. Because in the media, I can always tell you how I'll sit for an interview, and then the technician will go like, "Don't tell anyone, but I love Israel." When I'm marching into an Al Jazeera studio, and the guy was like, "That's amazing." Or the community that'll come to me, a community member, they'll say, "What's Azani? Are you Jewish? Or how does that work? Are you even Israeli?" And I get to tell them, "Yeah, some Israelis are brown as well." But I'll tell you something else.
I love that. I love those two little anecdotes. Very short, but very, very on point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I was speaking at a major high school, and the topic was Israel, and there was an operation in Gaza. And instead of talking about the operation in Gaza, I was brought in by the Club for Israel within that school, and I chose to not talk about Gaza. I said Gaza is going to come up in the Q&A. I choose the arena. So I spoke about my experience in Africa, spearheading humanitarian issues for Israel, both within the continent and beyond to Asia, liaising with the UN, just doing good. My goal was to inspire the younger generation for some optimism of being able to make a difference. Can you imagine a bureaucrat, a diplomat, a suited guy who comes in and instead of just coming with the usual, comes with a smile and optimism? And that's important because people are attracted to spring. They want to get that inspiration. And one of the students comes up to me. He's a Somali refugee who was part of that assembly. And he comes to me at the end and he says, "May I say something?" I said, "Of course. What do you want to tell me?" He said, "That's the first time I've heard such a thing about Israel. I didn't know you care. I did not know you care. You care." That connection of people to people. And this is what I want to say to you and to everyone here. The idea that there is this great sun of media that overshadows everything else and that we can't make a difference is a lie. Because if each of us is a firefly that can take that light of Israel to their family and their community and their friends and share that light of change and optimism, of acknowledging what's bad, but at the same time understand that we're all together in this as people, our light together can outshine the sun. And that's a major lesson that I've learned in the course of my short service and my ability to connect with people. And I take this with me wherever I go.
Fantastic. Beautiful. I do have a very interesting question that from Susan Glick that I do want to put out there still, because we still have some time. But term limits, what a great question. Term limits. There aren't term limits in Israel? Has it ever been discussed? I guess, there are many countries in the world, prime ministers can serve over and over and over and over and over again. But
Netanyahu promised in the past decade that if he's re-elected prime minister, he's going to limit it to 2 term limits. And then he said, "But that's me, so, can't miss me. I I'm here. So why waste only 2 when I can do 4 more? So at some point, that was one of the points mentioned by Naftali Bennett. And like you said before, hopefully in our path to healing and I think term limits, that's a great idea. And the one thing you want to know is you want to have, somehow the Israeli political system has a way of extracting you out. And if you don't go peacefully, there will be other means. And I think that's what we're seeing here karmatically when you look at the court cases. And so many of us wish for Netanyahu to remain in some sort of a leadership position for Israel, being able to speak up for Israel and use his connections without this, muddying of waters and tarnishing of all of the legal proceedings. It saddens everyone, even those who don't support him politically.
Right, right. All right, let's do a couple of quick rapid fire questions then.
Let's do it.
So, Arab list in the coalition, yes or no? What do you think will happen?
Could be. Not the Arab list, Mansour Abbas.
Yes, sorry, Mansour Abbas.
Yes.
Likelihood of, not likelihood, but in the absence of Netanyahu, for whatever reason, who would replace him in Likud?
From within Likud?
Yes.
I think Nir Barkat stands a great chance.
I got to give him a call.
Yeah.
And then outside Likud.
By the way, do you know how you know that he stands a good chance? Netanyahu belittles him at every opportunity.
Yes, yes, he's afraid of him.
That's how you know.
Right.
The farther you are, the better you are.
Right, right. And then outside of Likud.
Tough. I think it's a dark horse we don't see at the moment. The one that shies away from politics that's going to come in once the great emperor moves on.
Okay, okay. And now women in government. I think we've seen in the past more women at the forefront of Israeli parties and Israeli government. Seems to be absent now. Who do you see ascendant?
That's a tough one. I think Merav Michaeli is sending shockwaves through Israeli society, especially because of her insistence. In Hebrew, we have the differentiation between male and female. She takes twice the time to speak because she uses both. So that in itself, I think, is a great engine. And in any case, in Israeli society, we've always, since the Golda days, it's never been an issue for us.
Right. No, quite right. Quite right. And then out of the Ethiopian community, where does that community tend to vote? And are there any luminary politicians also who could step forward and
you have Pnina Tamano-Shata with Blue and White and others who are seasoned Israeli politicians at the moment. Even though they've traditionally been part of the right wing, you have not seen them establishing themselves as a separate force, and that's a good thing because Israel is Israel. We've got everyone from everywhere. The last thing I want to see is a Yemenite politician, Ethiopian politician, Ashkenazi politician. We're all in this together. We have enough subgroups. Now we have pro-Bibi, anti-Bibi.
And at 12:58 here, how long does this take to play out?
Very good. So now you have about a week until, so Friday, hopefully you'll really know, but a week until you get the official results, then a week until Rivlin decides who to give their mandate to, and then you have 6 weeks for that person, Bibi, to try and establish a government, after which you may get an extension or another candidate who will get another 4 to 6 weeks, after which, if there is no election, you have 3 weeks before the Knesset goes, and we have another election in September.
Okay.
So this could be a while. We could do like a whole series, but yeah, it can take at least a few weeks until you know which way you're going. Because Netanyahu, what he can still do is get the mandate, have his core group, and then starts reaching out for some defections from the other camp. So that could also happen.
Right, right. Fascinating. All right. Look, this has been
Too short.
2 or 3 hours of information in our 1 hour. I want to thank you, Toda Rabba Lecha. This has been very educational, very illuminating. I hope everyone enjoyed. We're going to wrap things up. I'll toss in one last question here. I guess, what are your thoughts on Israel's effort to facilitate vaccination of Palestinians?
Oh, amazing. I mean, Israel has been at the forefront of these efforts, hasn't asked twice. You have to start where you start, but there is a realization in Israel that, you live intertwined with the Palestinians. There is no issue whatsoever. I can even tell you that Netanyahu was under heavy criticism for giving some of the vaccines to Hamas leaders. And he came under criticism from the Golden family, for instance, that said, you should have used that opportunity because all we want to do is bury our son. So that's, again, as opposed to what's portrayed in the media, that's never an issue for Israel. It's just an issue of how and when, not an issue of if. Humanity is not an issue for Israelis.
Okay. Well, we're going to wrap things up. Thank you all for joining. Please note April 10th on your calendars for the next installment of our Israel Connection series. Another excellent topic, Minority of One, presented by Stand With Us, Hussein Abubakar's personal story of life in Egypt, anti-Semitism, and transformation. The story of how a regular young man from Cairo grew up hating Jews and Israel, and how he freed himself from that hatred, even at the risk of losing his life. Toda rabah, everybody. Chag Sameach.
Sameach.
Shachar.
Thank you. Amazing. Take care.
Thank you all.